time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
Hi, my name is Christian Devine and welcome to Retro View, and also welcome to Shocktober. October is my favorite month for various reasons. Not because it's my birthday month, because it's not, because it just represents the spirit of fall and scary movies and ghost stories and zombie games and all the things that make October worth living for. Particularly on this episode of Retro View, we're just in time for Shocktober. I went up to Oregon and actually visited the site where they filmed Just Before Dawn, Silver Falls. Very lovely up there, and fortunately there was no serrate macheted hillbillies waiting to serrate me. I would have had my fist ready. But it was beautiful up there. When I came back, this beautiful box was waiting for me, like it was an appointment.
I am here to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. Where is Rowan Morrison?
We don't commit murder up here. We're a deeply religious people.
The Wicker Man, the box set from Studio Canal, the 5-disc 4K UHD restoration. You can see the thickness there, and very lovely looking and very beautiful artwork on the cover. And I'd absolutely forgotten that I ordered this. And I noticed when I look at a lot of movie forums and music forums and game forums, people are very anxious to get their stuff, which I totally understand. I've just never felt like, unless I was really waiting for something, I just don't want to look at the clock. Because when you fly a lot, you realize that the more you look at the clock, the longer the flight gets. I actually learned that behind the counter for years. Oh, is it time to go? Stop looking at the clock and eventually you'll get there. And so I like packages and to come in the mail. It's always like kind of like Christmas, all the time when you're least expecting it. And so I was very excited about this release. And with some post-purchase reservations, which I'll get more into. The first being, this is a fairly expensive box set, and I got a little excited when I saw it and felt that I was going to miss out on it, like I missed out on the previous imprint Blu-ray set, which now I'm glad I actually didn't get, as gorgeously designed as it is, based on the fact that now there's a 4K release, which is going to make those Blu-rays basically, irrelevant. They still look fantastic, and I have from 2014 the final cut on the Lionsgate Blu-ray, which looks fantastic. It looks great, and considering the different versions, over the years, to have it even in a Blu-ray version, if you don't have 4K. It's still going to be remastered 4K for the Blu-ray, and it'll look, absolutely fantastic. So, but it's very exciting to have a restoration from the camera negative and using the materials that they have. And of course, everybody who knows the history of the film knows about the fact that this material is all over the place, and there's multiple versions. So the final cut could even be misnomer. They could find more footage. Who knows? Only the Wicker Man. For starters, this does have 5 discs, and there is another version of this that's not so thick and doesn't contain all the accoutrement, which I wasn't really aware of, and I probably should have just waited a bit, and because that's actually the version that I would have preferred to have received. Like I said, this is a beautiful box, but maybe too much of a good thing. But the most important thing for me is not the collectibles or the extras, it's the films on there and everything, the extras. And so to have this in HDR Dolby Vision is fantastic. And I have to say, just looking at the final cut, it looks spectacular. You can always tell when they have different footage, you know, they've cut in from other inferior sources. That's part and parcel of the film watching. So, but it's kind of great when you go from like this kind of, you know, multiple generation image to this incredibly sharp, beautifully colored frame that could be, you know, just been shot yesterday or today. And that's how good it often looks. And it does fluctuate a bit, but in general it looks fantastic all the way through, and I think you'll definitely notice the upgrade. Now, part of the retro view philosophy, I guess, here is to kind of frame these films in the way that I saw them growing up, etc., or whatever time, and placing them in a cultural context, which I always find kind of the most evidence-based way to look at a film, because you can kind of look at the culture around a film and kind of determines how it came out, how it was received or not received, etc. And The Wicker Man is certainly no different. I had heard about the film my whole life as a monster kid. You know, I've always heard it referenced in magazines and on TV, etc., etc. And when Wicker Man came out in 1974, it was not an audience success, although critics responded to it pretty quickly, it seems like. And it was released on a double bill with Nicholas Roeg's far more successful international suspense thriller, Don't Look Now. A film that I personally don't respond to, although I respect the filmmaking and it does have some genuinely creepy moments. It's just not a film that I particularly gelled to, nor actually really want to revisit. Although, like I said, I see its influence in it, the editing style. Steven Soderbergh loves it. Obviously, he's, you know, got an editorial mindset, and there's some wonderful editing in it, and photography, and like I said, some truly creepy scenes in it. And it's interesting that they released The Wicker Man on a double bill with that, and that didn't kind of help ignite the Wicker Man cult a little more, but maybe it did in some ways, but because that would be a really great double feature, and I would think that you would see The Wicker Man, and if you enjoyed Don't Look Now, you would be impressed by The Wicker Man, and there certainly wasn't, you know, enough exploitive elements in The Wicker Man to keep you interested. So I'm not sure why it didn't catch on per se. I mean, you can see that for the time when it came out, it might have been seen as, you know, shocking with the ending, and I've seen some interviews saying, you know, how could this film be successful based on how grim it is? But this is also a time of a lot of fairly grim British cinema, and you had Get Carter and particularly The Devils, which would be a fantastic double feature with The Wicker Man, when Warner Brothers decides to actually release The Devils from its vault in their hell, Studio Hell storage. And they both have somewhat similar endings, actually. And in a way, you can see Sergeant Howie, how his character was created based on how The Devils plays out. So that's a good double feature right there. But the film is championed by a lot of critics, and particularly the magazine Cinefantastique, who devoted an entire cover story about the making of it, and Christopher Lee was the film's #1 fan, and so he was very appreciative of Cinefantastique's effort, because that magazine probably did a lot to ignite the cult, at least in America, and I'm sure that it was already happening over in England, of course, too. So I always remember reading about and hearing about it, and it was probably, I imagine it was kind of spoilered for me fairly early on, even though I prided myself on staying away from reviews of films that I've never seen and keeping that thread going for decades even about films, because and books and games and things like music, because it's always exciting to hear something for the first time instead of being a snob about it, like, oh, you've never heard, seen, played, done this. It's like, well, if you haven't, what an exciting moment that you get to actually experience it. And so I'm kind of bummed that I don't really, you know, I feel like I've always known what the ending of The Wicker Man is. And I probably saw it on DVD, and liked it but didn't pay a lot of attention to it, and then probably later when some of the different versions were coming out, which is something that always fascinates me when films are lost and found, and we'll talk about that in another retro review because I'm obsessed with the idea of lost media. It just fascinates me. And so I known that there was a longer cut of The Wicker Man and the producers weren't happy with the film, and so allegedly it was buried under a freeway along with other refuse, or it was burned or taken away, or maybe it'll pop up someday. There's a new book coming out about the making of it by John Walsh, who does one of the essays in the booklet in the Studio Canal release, and I'm definitely going to read that because it sounds like he might have some more information. And so I'd always known about the film, and then when I saw, I think it was probably the final cut, even before that, I think I just saw maybe the theatrical cut, and then I was kind of in a period where I was paying attention to this kind of filmmaking, early 70s genre filmmaking, and I really paid attention to it and really fell in love with it the way a lot of people do. And a few things stand out just in terms of what I love about it. I love the fact that the film, from a writing point of view, this is a good time to give credit to the writer, Anthony Schaefer, and also to give credit to the writers for the Writers Guild strike. So congratulations on standing up for your right to write. And the fight continues, but for now the battle is won. And Anthony Schaefer was already famous for writing a hit Broadway play called Sleuth, a two-person play about kind of games and disguises and murder. And it was turned into a very successful film with Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier, which is actually kind of hard to come by in terms of watching it. I tried to stream it, I think, last year, and I just could not find a good version of it. And I don't think there's been a really major re-release of this film. And it's kind of amazing because it was a big hit, nominated for Academy Awards, and is a really fun film, so this might be a rights issue. And so Schaefer then wrote Hitchcock's film Frenzy from 1972, one of his more disturbing films, but one that actually kind of brought him a little more acclaim in his later years than his 60s work had done. And apparently Christopher Lee had read a novel called Ritual, and it was about a detective investigating kind of a cult Scottish town. And apparently Lee recommended the book to Schaefer, and I'm sure they got the rights to it, and Schaefer basically created, a more intricate story and a different story. But you'll see, I listened to the audio commentary with Christopher Lee, Robin Hardy, and they immediately kind of dismissed the book Ritual as being not connected at all to The Wicker Man, but that's not true. And it's not true because the author is included in the booklet in the Studio Canal release and is in the documentary, and certainly has his seduction scene as written in the book of Sergeant Howie by the innkeeper's daughter is pretty directly straight out of the book into the movie. And so it's just, once again, it's good to give credit where credit's due. And so, but Anthony Schaefer, of course, has to have credit for his screenplay because it's so unique and very Anthony Schaefer in terms of characters playing games and masquerades and murder, etc. And so, once again, this is going to be spoiler-free because I'm assuming you've seen the film. If you haven't, go watch it and come back because there's just too much to talk about in terms of specifics, plot points. And so, once again, what I love about the film is that Sergeant Howie, who is, finds out that there may be a child missing on the Scottish Isle, Summer Isle. And in the director's cut, which I'd never seen until I watched it on the 4K, actually, has a much more extended scene of Sergeant Howie with his life as in the police on the mainland, And you can see he's presented as rather uptight, religious, I won't say zealot, although some people describe him as that. He would probably be more fitting to be, most of London or England at the time, which apparently was, 80% plus Christian. And so that kind of stodgy, uptight, moralistic, hyper-moralistic point of view is probably more the norm. And the footage in the beginning of the director's cut, which is taken from basically looks like a tape source, is still fascinating because it really does show you all this extended stuff and the other officers making fun of Howie. But it's definitely good they cut it out for the final cut because it's extraneous and you get the point. I don't think there's anything in there that needs to be in there. And you can maybe argue that you can see why they'd shown before to create the kind of contrast, but you kind of get the sense of who the character is immediately when it gets to the island. And once again, that's what I love about the film, is that the second that Sergeant Howie gets to the island, the film gets weird. And Robin Hardy directs in a quasi-documentary style. His direction is not, doesn't call attention to itself, but seems to know exactly where to go. And the performances are fantastic. And Edward Woodward, who plays Sergeant Howie, was known to American audiences for his role in the 80s hit series The Equalizer. That's where I learned of him. And I loved The Equalizer as a kid. It was a super cool 80s show. Not a massive hit, but it hit enough that it lasted for 4 years. And what was cool about it was that Edward Woodward played this ex-secret agent, kind of atoning for his past sins by helping people out, anybody who needed help in New York. And of course, in my humble opinion, it had the greatest 80s TV show theme of all time by Stuart Copeland. You can't top that. And you had Edward Woodward as the Shakespearean trained actor bellowing these great lines. Great cast, fun show. So I'm already predisposed to love Edward Woodward. He's really great in this. And certainly in another kind of time and era, this is an Academy Award nominated worthy performance. Seriously, he's just so intense and believable. And, maybe not sympathetic, but maybe a little empathetic at points. And I'm going to give Sergeant Howie a little bit more defense than he usually gets. My name is Christian Devine. I can't help it. What are you going to do? The film immediately starts on a weird tone with the villagers seeming a bit off and doing everything they can to discourage Howie from being there and outright saying there's nobody missing, we don't know this girl. And then he discovers, of course, that when he goes to stay at the inn, that the innkeeper's daughter is treated as this bawdy folklore object. And you really start to get a sense of the pagan nature of the town, and then there's people out on the green at night having basically public orgies. And so you get the sense that immediately that Sergeant Howie is no longer in Kansas anymore. And he, of course, plays it off with a certain outraged, stiff upper lip, which is kind of hilarious. So the film is also a satire of religious mores, of course, and that's, that to me is one of the things I really also love about it. And not just a satire of the Christian mores, but also of the pagan mores. I don't think the film is proselytizing for any side particularly, and I think it's showing how organized religions can be corrupted and are corruptible. And so I think it's kind of even in terms of its presentation. Although the Summer Isle certainly looks idyllic and looks like a good time on a Saturday night.
I put my hand on her thigh and she says, do you want to try?
And of course there is a wonderful musical score by Paul Giovanni. And to me, The Wicker Man really is, I would call it a horror musical. And I'm actually surprised that they haven't turned this into a musical, because there's moments where you could easily extend these song numbers and they would just work in the context of the film. There's multiple songs in the film, and each one could be their own be extended to be a musical number. Even the moment with Christopher Lee singing is fantastic. Obviously has a very famous, singing voice, and so the score is really, part of the charm of the film. And Paul Giovanni's music is kind of like a, Nick Drakean, I guess, vibe, and very lovely, and certainly accounts for part of the film's mythos. And as the film progresses, it gets more, darkly humorous, how offended Sergeant Howie gets and how upfront the villagers are about where they live and who they are. And that's the one thing I really like about the film, is the villagers they're dishonest certainly in some ways. And in other ways, they're completely upfront. And they basically keep giving Sergeant Howie multiple chances to leave the island. They even give him a chance to not be their sacrificial virgin anymore. I guess one of the film's most famous scenes is Brett Eklund's dance of seduction while Howie is praying. And it's a very powerful scene, and it could be ludicrous, but Edward Woodward's performance really makes you believe he's being tempted, and Britt Eklund is, just really, into the moment and makes it believable. And I don't find it erotic as other people do, but it's certainly erotic for that character and for the filmmaking. So I love that Sergeant Howie could easily change his destiny by just going through that door, but he doesn't. And in a way, that's why he's the fool, because he just keeps following his own path that they're creating for him. Too, it's really wonderful, layers of irony going on there. And of course, Sergeant Howie meets the Lord of the Isle, Lord Summerisle, played by Christopher Lee, in what he considers his favorite part. And there's, of course, no reason to doubt that, because he's fantastic in it, and you couldn't conceive the film without him. And the best scenes in the film, to me, are the back and forth between Edward Woodward and Christopher Lee as they debate their various spiritual philosophies.
But they are naked.
Naturally, it's much too dangerous to jump through the fire with your clothes on.
What religion can they possibly be learning?
And it just is very wonderful to see Lee get this kind of part. Even though he was already breaking out of the Hammer Dracula horror film mode by this time, he had been in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes with Billy Wilder. He'd been in The Three Musketeers, which was a huge hit, and he was about to become even more internationally known as the James Bond villain in The Man with the Golden Gun. So Lee's career trajectory was definitely changing, and he wanted to be in a film that was not a Hammer-style horror film. And it's hard for me to call this a horror film in a way, because there is no horror per se. There's no gore, there's no on-screen violence. There's not even anything mystical or supernatural happening. Everything, he could simply be this policeman visiting this isle of people who are genuinely, a cult, a murderous cult. We don't know that anything they do actually happens, but they certainly did bring Howie to the island. And the director's cut actually answers the question of why and how the letter got to him, because I was like, well, what kind of letter was this? Was there a name? But no, there was an unsigned letter. And so it kind of explains a little more why he would go to the island without any sort of other information. So I love the scene where Sergeant Howie finally meets Lord Summerisle. Although, once again, in the extended cuts, they've added a scene where you encounter Lord Summerisle before he actually officially meets him. And it's when he's introducing a young teenage boy to be indoctrinated, I guess, by Britt Eklund. And I've never liked the scene because it doesn't belong there for a couple reasons. One, we haven't officially met Lord Summerisle, so I don't think this is actually a really good introduction to him. And Howie is just looking out the window watching him, and it seems like Howie would have mentioned this to him. Like, I saw you out in the garden with that boy, tempting that boy with that woman, that vixen, something. And so, and of course the footage is just not great footage, which is, once again, it's okay because I know they found it. And then Christopher Lee goes into this soliloquy about insects, etc., which is very cool. I just feel like that scene should have gone like the next night or after he meets him. Then it makes more sense. We've met Summerisle, we know who he is, what he's about, and we're seeing him in action. And there are lots of great little bits with the different villagers. It's always great to see Ingrid Pitt in a film, and Diane Salento, I think is how you say her last name. She was once married to Sean Connery, and she's great in the film too as a school teacher. And of course the eccentric English actor Aubrey Morris. And everything does have a very atmospheric vibe to it, and I think that's part of the appeal to the film. It really does create its own little world, and there's been a resurgence in this, the genre, and it's been called folk horror, which is a more modern term used to describe this kind of pastoral, supernatural films, primarily from England. And there's a wonderful documentary that you should definitely check out that has a whole history of folk horror. So of course the film, as we all know, Howie does not avoid his fate and ends up as the sacrificial virgin to the Wicker Man, and is horribly burned alive along with other animals. And this scene is very disturbing. Still disturbing when you start really thinking about it. And the way Edward Woodward, screams out is very disturbing. And Christopher Lee points out he's not saying, when he says Jesus Christ, he's not saying that as in shock. He's actually saying that as in help me. And that's true. That's accurate. When you watch the film, that's exactly what Sergeant Howie is doing. And although the deck is stacked against Sergeant Howie, for being this, believer, I don't think he deserves to be burned alive because he's, has these strong religious beliefs. He doesn't seem like he's a bad person. He's looking for a little girl. And the people on the island are basically going to, burn a human being alive to appease their, their so-called gods. So I do really like it when Sergeant Howie says to Christopher Lee, if this doesn't work, next year they're going to kill you. And you can see there's a look on Christopher Lee's face like, oh shit. And so the Sergeant Howie gets one last little lick in before his very horrible doom. So now let's go on to the actual review of the box set itself, which once again you see is quite beautiful here. So to start from the top, these are just my opinions, and nothing here is meant to dissuade you from getting this set in any way, because I think you have to support Studio Canal in this particular release because it's fantastic and they put a lot of effort into it. First off, as much as I love this illustration on the cover, and I think this was used for the re-release of the film, I always prefer to have the original poster. And the original poster I know is not dynamic, but even just the Wicker Man logo itself would be, to me, a more appropriate look for this. And so I'm always just, like I said, I know they're marketing this to, trying to get different people into the film, etc., and I think is wonderful. I just prefer to have a choice of having the original poster art. Now, that said, I probably should not have bought this box set because it does contain a few extra things that I don't really need, and I would have been happy just to have the 3 films on 4K. So this has 5 discs, so 2 are 4K and 2 are Blu-ray, and then there's a 5th disc of all the music from the film by Katie Pearson. And that's the element that I don't find particularly useful, because I would much rather have the actual Paul Giovanni soundtrack, which I imagine they probably had some rights issues to not having. And I think the Katie Pearson music is lovely. And in fact, I think, you know, if you were to go on a tour and do a Wicker Man song tour, I would be there. I would certainly go see that. But, you know, part of the charm and magic of the film is those actual songs, and so I would have preferred just to have the actual music. So here's the beautiful box, and if you open it, which you will have to, you're going to get a little surprise, although if you can actually open it. This is one of my favorite things about box sets. You'll simply never understand the true nature of sacrifice, not until you spend this much money on a box set. I joke. And then you open it, and then you've got the packaging here, which is, of course, rather difficult to open. You have to pull out like this, and this is already in the bottom, and so this is a problem too, is that the CD always falls out every time I've opened this. Another reason I don't necessarily need the CD. Here you have the original poster, and then the re-release poster. I love the 50th anniversary. The Wicker Man candle, which I definitely feel like I should get. The souvenir set, which you kind of have to flip this open to get to everything, which once again, kind of a drag. So we'll place it at the bottom, and then the collector's edition booklet, which is pretty cool. There's some good stuff in there, but not a substitute for a good thicker book or documentary, but it's a good read. And so that's the contents. There's the 2 4Ks right there, and once again the CD that always falls out. So there is the box set. And so the actual UHD 4K disc has some, you know, extra material, of course, revisiting the locations of the Wicker Man and the Wicker Man at 50, which is a pretty interesting documentary, which I could have definitely seen a lot more of. And they talk about Robin Hardy's script, The Lost Ending, which, you know, had much more Christopher Lee dialogue, which of course they probably filmed. And I'm sure there's lots of extra stuff they filmed that we'll never see. There's a new Britt Ekland interview, and she's very honest about her role in the film. And she was actually, of course I should mention that she was actually dubbed, which is somewhat, if you know her voice, and I do, it's noticeable. But the film does a pretty good job of disguising this. And there's an interview with Robin Hardy, who seems to always be changing his mind about which particular version he likes. And how does the film look? They all look fantastic. Like I said, they all look great. And you have to excuse the inferior sources for some of the later added material. We're lucky we have it. And in some cases, the material looks fantastic because they found better versions of it, 35mm versions. So, you know, some of the found footage actually didn't look great in the director's cut. It looks fantastic in the final cut. And Lionsgate is going to be releasing the final cut on 4K, I think, next month or so. So it's not going to have the other 2 cuts, and so I don't think it's going to have much in the way of extras, which is too bad. But so I would advise you to get the, you know, the 5-disc set, the smaller version, or if you want just to have this beautiful box set as a display. So I'm not sure what it is about this film that's so fascinating to people, including myself, over the years. It's just very well made, intriguing, quasi-supernatural satire of religious mores. And I think it's, you know, got something to say about religion and how we perceive it, how we believe in it. And like I said, I don't think the film is proselytizing for any particular point of view. It's pointing out maybe the fool in all of us. and maybe the wise person. I do know the film is kind of like a record that I like to put on in the background. It's a fun film for a mode, for a mood to put on. And like I said, in this autumnal time of year, even though it's a May Day film, it's a fantastic Shocktober viewing experience, and so I'm very happy that Studio Canal has released this in 4K. And I'm going to go on record once again and say I prefer the theatrical cut to the other versions, although I'm glad to have the other versions, and I will certainly rewatch them. So thank you for retro viewing. I hope you're having a wonderful Halloween, and please like and subscribe if you want to keep the retro view season prosperous. Otherwise, I'll have to make an appointment with you for the Wicker Man.